The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the Red River Saloon, and Catherine Moore stepped down into the dusty street of Abilene, Kansas, with nothing but a worn leather satchel, a rumpled letter of recommendation, and 5 job offers waiting for her arrival in the spring of 1878. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston, enduring the cramped quarters, the endless plains, and the suspicious stares of fellow passengers who could not fathom why a respectable woman would venture alone into cattle country. Catherine was 23 years old, educated at a women's college, and desperate enough to leave behind everything familiar for the promise of independence. Her father had died 6 months earlier, leaving debts that consumed their modest home. Her mother had remarried within weeks, choosing security with a cold-hearted banker who made it clear that Catherine was an unwelcome burden. So when the advertisement appeared seeking teachers, bookkeepers, and skilled workers for the growing towns of Kansas, Catherine had written to every establishment that would consider a woman. To her amazement, 5 had responded with offers. The problem that became immediately apparent as she stood in the late afternoon sun was that not one of those offers had included lodging. Catherine clutched her satchel and surveyed the town. Abilene stretched before her in a mix of false-fronted buildings, dusty streets, and the constant movement of cowboys, cattle, and commerce. The air smelled of livestock, tobacco, and opportunity. She could hear piano music drifting from somewhere nearby, along with raucous laughter and the lowing of cattle from the stockyards at the edge of town. Her first stop was the Cattleman's Bank, where she had been offered a position keeping ledgers. The bank manager, a portly man named Horace Winters, greeted her with enthusiasm that dimmed only slightly when she inquired about boarding houses. "Well now, Miss Moore, that is a difficulty," he admitted, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "The decent boarding house run by Mrs. Patterson has been full up for 2 months. All them cattle buyers coming through, you understand. There is the hotel, but that runs $2 a night, and on the salary we discussed, I do not imagine that would be sustainable." Catherine felt her stomach sink but kept her composure. "Are there no other options?" "There is a rooming house on the south end, but I could not in good conscience recommend it for a lady of your standing. The women who lodge there are, well, they work in the saloons, if you take my meaning." She took his meaning perfectly well. Catherine thanked him and promised to consider the bank position once she had settled the housing matter. She visited the other establishments next: the general store that needed help with inventory and correspondence, the schoolhouse that needed a teacher for the older children, the telegraph office that needed an operator, and the newspaper office that needed someone who could set type and write copy. Each employer expressed delight at her qualifications and dismay at her housing predicament. Each offered the same information about Mrs. Patterson's boarding house being full, and the unsuitability of other arrangements. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Catherine found herself standing outside the Drover's Rest, the only hotel in town, calculating that her savings would last perhaps 2 weeks at their rates before she would be destitute. "You look like you have been wrestling with a problem that is winning," a voice said from behind her. Catherine turned to find a man leaning against a post, one boot crossed over the other in a relaxed stance that somehow did not diminish the alertness in his eyes. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He wore the typical garb of a cowboy: worn denims, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest, and a hat pushed back to reveal a face that was more interesting than handsome, with strong features and an expression of genuine curiosity rather than the leering assessment she had endured from other men that afternoon. "I have encountered an unexpected obstacle," Catherine admitted, too tired to be coy. "I have 5 job offers in this town but no place to sleep." The cowboy's eyebrows rose. 5 job offers. That is impressive. Most folks are happy to get one. He straightened and touched the brim of his hat. Name is James Thornton, though most call me Thorn. I work the ranches around here, breaking horses mostly. Catherine Moore, I am beginning to think I should have secured lodging before securing employment. Mrs. Patterson's place full up. When Catherine nodded, he frowned thoughtfully. That is a genuine problem. The other boarding situations in town are not fitting for someone looking to build a respectable life. He was quiet for a moment, appearing to wrestle with something internal. Then he said, I have a spare room. Catherine stiffened. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Thornton, but I did not come all the way from Boston to ruin my reputation before I have even begun. No, I am explaining this poorly, he said quickly, holding up his hands. I have a small house on the edge of town, 2 bedrooms. My sister lived with me until she married and moved to her husband's ranch about 6 months back. The room has been empty since. It has a good lock on the door, and I promise you would have complete privacy and respect. I am not offering anything improper, Miss Moore. I am offering a room for rent, same as Mrs. Patterson would, just without the chaperone of a dozen other boarders. Why would you offer this to a complete stranger? Because you look honest and desperate in equal measure, and because I understand what it is like to need a chance, he said simply. I came here 7 years ago with nothing but a horse and my skills. Folks took a risk on me and I made something of myself. Maybe it is time I paid that forward. Catherine studied him carefully. There was no guile in his expression, no hidden motive that she could detect. She had developed good instincts about people during her years navigating Boston society and then the harsher realities after her father's death. This man, this James Thornton, seemed genuine. But still, the impropriety of the situation made her hesitate. I cannot pay much, she said slowly, not until I begin working and receive my first wages. How about this, he offered. You pay nothing for the first 2 weeks, which gives you time to start one of those jobs and collect a paycheck. After that, we can work out something fair. And if anyone in town gives you grief about the arrangement, you tell them to come talk to me. My reputation is solid enough that it should shield yours. It was foolish, possibly even dangerous, but Catherine found herself nodding. I would need that lock you mentioned, and your word that you will respect my privacy. You have both, he said solemnly. Let me help you with your bag. James Thornton's house was a modest structure built of wood that had weathered to a soft gray. It sat on a 1/4 acre at the north edge of town, with a small corral beside it where 2 horses stood drowsing in the evening air. The interior was surprisingly neat for a bachelor dwelling, with simple furniture that looked handmade but well crafted. He showed her to the spare room, which contained a bed with a star-pattern quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the open prairie. My sister made the quilt, he said. She would be happy to know it is getting use again. The door has a bolt on the inside, see? He demonstrated the mechanism. My room is on the other side of the house, through the main room. There is a pump in the kitchen for water, and the privy is out back. I am usually up before dawn and often gone during the day working ranches, so you will have the place mostly to yourself. This is very generous, Catherine said, setting her satchel on the bed. Now that she was here, the full reality of what she had agreed to settled over her. She was in a strange town, in the house of a strange man, with no one to turn to if things went wrong. As if reading her thoughts, James said quietly, I know this is not ideal, Miss Moore, and I know you have no reason to trust me beyond my word. But I promise you, I will conduct myself with nothing but respect. You are safe here. Something in his tone, in the steadiness of his gaze, settled her nerves. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. Just Thorn, please. Mr. Thornton makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and working in an office. He smiled, and it transformed his face entirely, adding warmth and a hint of mischief. "I will leave you to settle in. I am going to see to the horses and then make some supper if you are hungry." After he left, closing the door behind him, Catherine sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a long, shaky breath. She had done it. She had crossed a continent, secured multiple job offers, and found lodging, however unconventional. Now she just had to make it all work. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses on pegs, arranging her comb and hairpins on the dresser, and placing her precious books on the windowsill. Then she washed her face and hands at the washstand, tidied her hair, and ventured out to the main room. The house smelled of coffee and frying bacon. James stood at the stove, managing a skillet with practiced ease. He glanced over his shoulder when she emerged. "I hope you like bacon and eggs." "It is about the limit of my cooking skills, along with beans and the occasional steak." "It sounds wonderful," Catherine admitted. She had not eaten since a brief stop that morning, and her stomach was making its displeasure known. They ate at a small table, the meal simple but satisfying. The conversation was cautious at first, both of them navigating the strangeness of the situation. Catherine learned that James was 27, that he had grown up on a struggling farm in Missouri, and that he had come west after his parents died within a year of each other when he was 20. "I needed a fresh start," he explained. "Somewhere I could be my own man and not just the son of people who could not quite make ends meet. I am good with horses, always have been, so I found work breaking and training them. Built this house myself 3 years ago. Your sister lived with you, Emma. She is 2 years younger. She came out to join me when she turned 18. Said she was tired of living with our aunt who wanted her to marry the banker's son back home. She worked as a seamstress here until she met Robert, who runs a cattle ranch about 15 miles north. They married last fall. You must miss her." "I do," he admitted. "But she is happy, and that matters most. What about you? What brings a well-spoken woman from Boston all the way to cattle country?" Catherine found herself explaining about her father's death, her mother's remarriage, and the impossible situation that had driven her west. James listened without interruption, his expression sympathetic. "That takes courage," he said when she finished, "leaving everything you know to start over." "Or desperation," she replied with a wry smile. "Sometimes they look the same, but you are here and you have options. That counts for something." After supper, Catherine insisted on washing the dishes while James saw to evening chores. She stood at the washbasin, scrubbing plates and watching through the window as he moved through the corral, checking the horses with gentle competence. There was something calming about the domestic routine, something that felt almost normal despite the strangeness of her circumstances. That night, lying in the narrow bed under the star quilt, Catherine listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie night. Insects chirped, a dog barked in the distance, and somewhere far off cattle lowed. She heard James moving quietly through the house, the sound of his door closing and then silence. Her hand rested on the bolt of her door, reassured by its solidity, but she found that she was not afraid. Uncertain, yes, but not afraid. She had made her leap. Now she would see where she landed. Morning came with the sound of roosters and the smell of coffee. Catherine dressed quickly, braided her hair, and emerged to find James already up, the coffee pot warm on the stove. "Help yourself," he said, gesturing to the pot. "I am heading out to the Rockingham Ranch to work with some new horses they bought. I will likely be gone most of the day. Will you be all right?" "I plan to visit the school and the newspaper office to make my final decisions about employment," Catherine said, pouring herself coffee. "I need to choose which position to accept. 5 offers is a luxury. Most folks would envy that problem," she smiled. "I keep reminding myself of that, though I confess I am torn between the schoolhouse and the newspaper." The bank work would be steady and respectable, but both teaching and writing appeal to me more. The newspaper editor, Sam Griggs, is a fair man. And the schoolhouse could use someone with real education. Miss Hanson, who teaches the little ones, tries her best with the older children too, but she only had about 6 years of schooling herself. You seem to know everyone in town. It is not that large a place, and I have been here 7 years. You get to know folks. He set his empty cup in the wash basin. If you need anything, the general store owner, Mr. Chen, is a good person to ask for help. He and his wife have been here almost as long as I have, and they know everything that happens in Abilene. After James left, Catherine finished her coffee and tidied the kitchen. Then she set out for town, walking the dusty road with purpose. The morning air was fresh and cool, though she knew from yesterday's experience that by afternoon it would be hot. The plains stretched endlessly on either side, golden grass rippling in the breeze like an ocean. Her first stop was the schoolhouse, a simple building on the east side of town. Miss Hanson, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a warm smile, greeted her enthusiastically. "Oh, Miss Moore, I am so glad you came. The older children, the ones over 12, they need more than I can give them. I can teach them reading and basic arithmetic, but you mentioned in your letter that you studied literature, history, and advanced mathematics. That is exactly what they need if any of them hope to go on to higher education or professional positions." They discussed the position in detail. The pay was modest but fair, and the school term ran 9 months with summers off. Catherine would be responsible for about 15 students ranging from 12 to 17, teaching them in a separate room from Miss Hanson's younger pupils. "When would you need me to start?" Catherine asked. "The new term begins in 1 week. That would give you time to review the materials and prepare your lessons." From the schoolhouse, Catherine walked to the office of the Abilene Chronicle, the town's weekly newspaper. Sam Griggs was a man in his 50s with ink-stained fingers and a shrewd gaze behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "So you are the woman from Boston who knows how to set type and write a proper sentence," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I have been running this paper single-handed for 3 years, and I am tired. I need someone who can help with the writing, the layout, and the actual printing." "Are you truly capable, or were you exaggerating your skills?" Catherine met his challenging tone calmly. "Give me a test. Assign me a story to write and let me demonstrate my typesetting." His eyebrows rose and then he smiled. "I like your confidence. All right. There is a town council meeting tonight at 7. Attend it, take notes, and write me a column about it. Then tomorrow, come in and set the type for it. If your work is good, the job is yours. And the pay? $12 a week to start, more if you prove indispensable." It was more than the teaching position offered, and the work intrigued her. Catherine agreed to his terms and spent the rest of the morning familiarizing herself with the town, noting locations and introductions for future reference. She met Mr. Chen at the general store, a Chinese immigrant who had established a thriving business, despite the prejudice she could tell he faced from some townsfolk. His wife, May, was a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a kind demeanor. "You are staying with James Thornton," Mr. Chen said. It was not a question. "News travels quickly. It is a small town. But do not worry. Thorne is a good man, honest and hardworking. If anyone questions your reputation, you send them to me. I will vouch for both of you." His support from someone she had just met touched her deeply. "Thank you." That evening, Catherine attended the town council meeting armed with a notebook and pencil. She sat in the back of the room and took careful notes as the councilmen debated issues ranging from the need for a new well to complaints about cowboys shooting their guns in town. She noted the personalities, the tensions, and the occasional humor that emerged. When she returned to the house, James was already home cleaning tack by lamplight, "How did your day go?" he asked. "Productive. I attended a town council meeting to write a story for the newspaper as a test of my abilities." "You are taking the newspaper job, then?" "I am considering it seriously." "The schoolhouse is also tempting, but the newspaper offers better pay and the work appeals to me." "You would be good at either," he said. "You have that quality of really listening when people talk." "That is rare." She was surprised by the observation. "You determined that from one supper conversation, and breakfast, and watching how you carried yourself around town today." "I saw you talking with Mr. Chen when I rode past earlier. You looked genuinely interested in what he was saying, not just polite." Catherine felt color rise in her cheeks at the implication that he had been observing her, but his tone was not inappropriate, merely matter-of-fact. "I am interested in people and their stories. It is what drew me to the idea of journalism." She stayed up late that night by lamplight, crafting her article about the town council meeting. She wrote clearly and concisely, capturing not just the facts but the flavor of the proceedings, the characters of the councilmen, and the concerns of the citizens. By the time she finally slept, she felt satisfied with her work. The next morning, she presented her handwritten article to Sam Griggs. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up and said, "Can you start Monday?" Relief and excitement flooded through her. "Yes." "Good, come in tomorrow and I will train you on the printing press and the typesetting." "You write well, Miss Moore. This town could use more journalism that actually informs rather than just reporting gossip." Catherine accepted the position formally, then went to the other establishments to politely decline their offers. Everyone understood, though Horace Winters at the bank looked disappointed. "If the newspaper does not work out, my offer stands," he said. With employment secured, Catherine felt the first real stirring of hope since her father's death. She was going to make this work. She was going to build a life here. Over the following weeks, Catherine settled into a routine. She worked at the Chronicle from early morning until mid-afternoon, learning the intricacies of the printing press, the layout of the pages, and the rhythm of getting a weekly newspaper published. Sam proved to be an excellent teacher, demanding but fair, and he gave her increasing responsibility as her skills developed. She wrote articles about town events, interviewed local ranchers and business owners, and even convinced Sam to let her write a column offering advice and observations about life in Abilene. Her living situation with James became surprisingly comfortable. They maintained separate schedules for the most part, but they fell into a pattern of sharing supper several evenings a week when their work allowed. James was easy company, not requiring constant conversation but engaging when he did talk. He told her stories about the horses he worked with, the ranchers he knew, and the land itself, which he loved with a quiet passion. "There is something about this country," he said one evening as they sat on the small porch watching the sunset. "It is hard and unforgiving, but it is also honest. You know where you stand. If you work hard and treat people fair, you can make a place for yourself. That matters to folks like us who did not inherit some easy path." "Folks like us," Catherine repeated. "I suppose we are similar in that way, both starting over, both determined to succeed on our own merits." "Exactly." He glanced at her, and something warm flickered in his eyes before he looked away. "You are doing well at the newspaper. I hear folks talking about your articles at the saloon and the general store. They like that you tell things straight and make them interesting." "You discuss me at the saloon?" Catherine asked, torn between amusement and embarrassment. "Not discuss exactly, but people mention the newspaper, and when they do, they mention you." "It is all positive," he added quickly. "I am glad. I want to do well here to prove I made the right decision coming west." "I think you did," he said quietly. As the weeks turned into a month and then two, Catherine began to feel truly settled. She paid James rent from her earnings, though he charged her far less than she knew the room was worth. She made friends in town, particularly with May Chen and with Sarah Martin, a young widow who ran a small bakery. She attended church services and social gatherings, and if a few people whispered about her living arrangements, most seemed to accept that they were purely businesslike. What Catherine did not fully acknowledge, even to herself, was how much she had come to enjoy James's company. She found herself looking forward to the evenings when he was home, to the easy conversations and comfortable silences. She noticed things about him: the way he was unfailingly gentle with animals and children, how he helped neighbors without being asked, how his rare smiles transformed his serious face. He was different from the men she had known in Boston, less refined perhaps, but more genuine, more solidly dependable. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read, but he never said anything improper or made her uncomfortable. They maintained careful boundaries, respecting each other's privacy and space. Then came the day in late June when everything shifted. Catherine was walking back from the newspaper office, tired but satisfied after putting the latest edition to bed. The afternoon heat shimmered off the dusty street. As she passed the Red River Saloon, she heard raised voices and then a crash. Two men stumbled out onto the wooden sidewalk, grappling with each other. Other men followed, shouting encouragement or trying to break up the fight. She moved to cross the street, wanting to avoid the altercation, but one of the fighting men stumbled backward directly into her path. Catherine tried to dodge, but his elbow caught her shoulder hard, spinning her around. She would have fallen if strong hands had not caught her. "I have got you," James's voice said in her ear. He steadied her, then turned to face the brawling men, his voice sharp. "Take your fight somewhere else. You nearly hurt someone who had nothing to do with your dispute." The man who had hit her, a cowboy she did not recognize, barely glanced at them. "Was an accident. She should not be walking here anyway." "She has every right to walk anywhere in this town," James said, his tone hardening. "Apologize to the lady." "Or what?" The cowboy was drunk and belligerent, his face flushed. Catherine put her hand on James's arm. "It is all right. I am not hurt. Let us just go." But James's jaw was set. "Apologize," he repeated. The cowboy's companion, marginally more sober, grabbed his friend's arm. "Just say sorry, Chet. It ain't worth trouble." "Sorry," Chet muttered, and allowed himself to be dragged back toward the saloon. James kept his hand on Catherine's back as he guided her away from the scene. "Are you sure you are not hurt?" "I am fine, just startled." She looked up at him, seeing the genuine concern in his face. "Thank you for intervening. He had no right to treat you carelessly, accident or not." He seemed angrier about the incident than the situation warranted. They walked in silence for a moment before he said, "I do not like the idea of you walking around town alone. There are too many cowboys coming through, too many men who have been on the trail too long and forget their manners. I cannot hide in the house. I have work to do. I know, I just wish." He trailed off, then shook his head. "Never mind." "What?" "Nothing. It is not my place." They had reached the house. Catherine stopped before going inside. "James, what were you going to say?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I was going to say I wish I had the right to look out for you properly, but I do not. Our arrangement is business, and I have no claim beyond being your landlord. But the truth is I worry about you, more than I should, probably." Catherine's heart began to beat faster. "More than you should. I have said too much." He stepped back, creating distance. "I apologize if I have made you uncomfortable." "You have not," she said quickly. I did not realize you felt protective of me. I respect you too much to burden you with feelings that would complicate things. You came here for independence, for a chance to build your own life. I will not interfere with that." His voice was formal now, as if he were forcing himself back behind appropriate boundaries. Catherine felt a tumult of emotions she could not name. What if I wanted things to be complicated? The words escaped before she could stop them, and they hung in the air between them. James went very still. Catherine. It was the first time he had used her given name. You do not mean that. I think I do. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I think I have meant it for weeks, but was too afraid to acknowledge it. You deserve better than a horse breaker who lives in a small house at the edge of town, he said roughly. You are educated, refined, from a good family. I am just— You are a good man, she interrupted. You are honest and kind and hardworking. You gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go, and you have never once taken advantage or been anything but respectful. You listen when I talk about my work as if it matters. You make me laugh. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of this as just a convenient living arrangement and started thinking of it as home. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. I am going to kiss you now if you do not object. I do not object, she breathed. His kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he could not quite believe she was allowing it. Then Catherine leaned into him, her hands gripping his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that since about the 3rd day you were here, he admitted. When you came into the kitchen with your hair still braided from sleep and smiled at me over your coffee cup. Why did you not say anything? Because I thought you would leave if I did, and I would rather have you here as just a boarder than not have you here at all, Catherine laughed shakily. I would not have left. I know that now. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. When he pulled back, his expression was serious. Catherine, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we allow ourselves to care for each other, I am not interested in something temporary. I know that might sound too much too soon, but I am 27 years old and I have lived enough life to know what matters. You matter. If you want this, want me, then I want it to be real and serious and heading toward a future. I want that too, she said, surprised by how certain she felt. I came west to build a new life, and I think maybe you are part of that life. He smiled, that transforming smile that made her heart skip. Then we are in agreement. They stood there on the porch as the sun set, holding each other and talking quietly about what came next. They agreed to be discreet, to continue their separate rooms and respectful boundaries until they could make more permanent arrangements. Neither wanted to give the town gossips reason to question Catherine's reputation or James's honor. But everything was different now, charged with new meaning. The casual conversations took on deeper significance. The accidental touches became deliberate. Catherine found herself falling in love in a way she had never imagined, not with grand, romantic gestures but with quiet moments of connection, with shared work and shared laughter, and the growing certainty that they fit together in all the ways that mattered. James courted her properly over the following weeks. He took her to church socials and town dances, always respectful, but making it clear to everyone that his intentions toward Catherine were serious. He brought her wildflowers picked from the prairie, and once, a book of poetry he had ordered specially from a catalog because she had mentioned missing her collection back in Boston. I am not much for fancy words myself, he said as he gave it to her, but I thought you might enjoy them. She did, but she enjoyed even more the thought he had put into the gift, the effort to give her something that matched her interests rather than his own. They talked for hours about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. James told her about the poverty of his youth, about watching his parents work themselves into early graves trying to keep the farm going, about his determination to create a different life. Catherine told him about the loneliness of her last years in Boston, about feeling like she did not quite fit anywhere, about the terror and exhilaration of setting out alone for Kansas. "I was so frightened when I stepped off that stagecoach," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch. "I had no idea what I was doing or if I had made a terrible mistake." "I was terrified when I saw you standing there looking lost," James confessed, "because I took one look at you and thought, that is the woman I am going to marry, and I knew I was in trouble." Catherine laughed. "You did not think that." "I did. Ask anyone who knows me. I have never been impulsive, never made quick decisions. But something about you, even just standing there in the street, told me you were important." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I have never told anyone this, but after I showed you the house and you agreed to take the room, I went out to the corral and I just stood there thinking, do not ruin this. Do not scare her off. Just be patient and see what happens." "I am glad you were patient," Catherine said softly. "It was the hardest thing I have ever done," he said with feeling, and she laughed again. By late summer, it was understood by everyone in town that James Thornton and Catherine Moore were courting seriously. The gossip had shifted from speculation about the impropriety of their living arrangement to speculation about when James would propose. Catherine deflected questions from her friends with good humor, but privately, she wondered the same thing. Then came the evening in September when James asked her to take a walk with him after supper. They headed out toward the prairie, the setting sun painting everything gold. When they were well away from the house, James stopped and turned to face her. "I have been trying to figure out the right way to do this," he said. "I thought about waiting for some special occasion, or maybe taking you somewhere more romantic than the prairie at sunset. But then I realized that this is us. This land, this simplicity, this honesty, so I am just going to ask." He took both her hands in his. "Catherine Moore, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me these past months?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small sapphire. "It was my mother's. My father gave it to her when he proposed. It is not much, but—" "It is perfect," Catherine said as he slid it onto her finger. "It is absolutely perfect." They kissed there in the golden light of the prairie sunset, and Catherine felt something settle deep in her soul. This was right. This was home. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church on the edge of town. Emma, James's sister, came in from her ranch with her husband Robert to stand witness. Mei Chen helped Catherine sew a simple but beautiful dress of pale blue silk. Sam Griggs walked Catherine down the aisle, a gesture that touched her deeply. The ceremony was short but meaningful, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her with a tenderness that made her cry. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, held in the churchyard with long tables of food and a fiddle player providing music. Catherine stood beside her new husband, accepting congratulations and well wishes, and felt overwhelmed by how fully she had been accepted into this community. "You took a chance on this town, mister," Chen said when he greeted them. "And the town took a chance on you. We are all glad both sides benefited." That night, returning to the house that was now truly their home, James carried Catherine over the threshold. She laughed at the old-fashioned gesture, but she loved it too. "I want to do this right," James said, setting her down gently in the main room. "I want you to know that I am going to spend every day earning the trust you placed in me when you agreed to marry me." "You already have my trust," Catherine said, reaching up to touch his face. "You had it when I moved into your home as a stranger. You kept it through all these months. And you will keep it for all the years to come." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a discovery of each other that felt both new and somehow inevitable. Afterward, lying in James's arms in what had been his solitary room and was now theirs together, Catherine felt a peace she had not known since before her father's death. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, James replied, more than I thought I could love anyone. Married life suited them both. Catherine continued her work at the newspaper, and Sam even made her co-editor as her skills and reputation grew. Her column became popular throughout the county, and she began receiving requests from other newspapers to reprint her work. James continued breaking horses, but he also began training them for more specialized work, developing a reputation that brought clients from increasingly distant ranches. They expanded the house, adding a proper parlor and a larger kitchen. They bought more land, building a bigger corral and a small barn. James taught Catherine to ride, patiently guiding her through the basics until she was confident enough to join him on trips across the prairie. "You are a natural," he said one day as they rode together, the wind whipping their hair. "You just needed someone to believe in you." "I could say the same about you," Catherine replied. "You have become one of the most respected horsemen in the county." "Because I have a wife who makes me want to be better," he said simply. Their first Christmas together was a joy. Emma and Robert came to town, and they hosted a dinner that included the Chens, Sam Griggs, and several other friends. The small house was packed and noisy and wonderful. Catherine looked around the table at one point, seeing James laughing at something Robert said, seeing the faces of people who had become her family, and felt grateful beyond words. In the spring, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She told James one evening after supper, too excited to wait for a special moment. "You are certain?" He asked, his face a mix of joy and anxiety. "As certain as I can be without seeing the doctor, but yes, I am quite certain." He swept her into his arms, holding her so tightly she squeaked in protest. Sorry, he said, loosening his grip. I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Catherine assured him. He was attentive to the point of being overprotective throughout her pregnancy. Catherine had to firmly insist that she was capable of continuing to work, at least for a while, and that she did not need to be wrapped in cotton wool. "I just want you safe," James said. "Both of you? We are safe. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my wife having my baby," he countered, and she could not argue with that logic. Their son was born in January of 1880 on a cold night when the wind howled across the prairie. The labor was long and difficult, and James paced the main room while Mei Chen and the town's midwife attended Catherine. When the baby's cry finally rang out, James burst into the room despite being told to wait. "Is she all right?" he demanded. "Is the baby all right?" "Both fine," Mei said, smiling. "You have a son." James approached the bed where Catherine lay exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. "Look at him," she whispered. "Look at what we made." James sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his son with wonder. "He is perfect. You are perfect." He kissed Catherine's forehead. "Thank you." They named him David after Catherine's father. He was a healthy, hungry baby who quickly established himself as the center of their world. James was a devoted father, coming home early from jobs to spend time with his son, walking the floor with him at night when he fussed, talking to him in a soft voice that made Catherine's heart melt. "I never knew I could love something this much," James admitted one night as he held the sleeping baby. "I love you beyond reason, and now I love him the same way. It is almost frightening." "It is life," Catherine said. "This is what we built together." Catherine reduced her hours at the newspaper, working from home much of the time while Sam hired a young man to help with the physical printing. She wrote her column with David sleeping in a cradle beside her desk, and she felt fulfilled in a way she never had before. She loved being a mother, but she loved too that her work continued, that she had not had to give up her identity to embrace this new role. The years flowed past, marked by the rhythms of the seasons and the growth of their family. A second son, Michael, arrived 2 years after David, then a daughter, Emma, named for James's sister. The house expanded again to accommodate them all, growing into a comfortable, sprawling structure that was always full of noise and life. James's horse training business thrived to the point where he hired help, teaching younger men his methods while he focused on the most difficult cases. Catherine's writing gained a regional reputation, and she published a collection of her columns in a book that sold well throughout Kansas and into neighboring states. "Remember when you stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but a satchel and 5 job offers?" James said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. David was 10 now, Michael 8, and Emma 6. "I remember thinking I had made a terrible mistake," Catherine admitted. "And then I met a cowboy who offered me a room and respect and changed everything." "I offered you a room. You gave me a life," James said. "Everything good that I have comes from the day you trusted me enough to say yes." "We gave each other a life," Catherine corrected. "I would still be trapped in Boston in a situation that made me miserable or struggling alone in some boarding house if not for you." He took her hand, rubbing his thumb over her wedding ring. "Do you ever regret it, choosing this life, this place?" "Never, not for a single moment. Even when the wind blows so hard the house shakes. Even when the heat makes it almost impossible to breathe. Even when the children all get sick at once and we do not sleep for days," Catherine laughed. "Even then, this is real, James, this is solid. These children, this home, this love we have built together, it is more than I ever dreamed of having." "Good," he said, pulling her close. "Because I plan on keeping you for about the next 50 years if you will have me." "I will have you," she promised. As their children grew, Catherine and James became pillars of the community. James served on the town council, working to improve Abilene and ensure it remained a good place to raise families. Catherine continued writing, but she also taught occasional classes for young women who wanted to learn journalism or improve their writing skills. Their home became a gathering place for friends and neighbors, known for its warmth and hospitality. Emma Thornton, their daughter, showed an early aptitude for horses like her father, spending hours in the corral learning everything James could teach her. David proved to have his mother's way with words, writing stories, and keeping detailed journals. Michael was the adventurous one, always exploring, always pushing boundaries in ways that made his parents alternately proud and anxious. "They are good children," James said one night after they had finally gotten all 3 settled in bed. "We did something right." "We did everything right," Catherine said. "We loved each other and we loved them and we gave them a stable home. That is what matters." In the summer of their 15th wedding anniversary, James surprised Catherine with a trip to Dodge City, arranging for Emma and Robert to watch the children for a week. They stayed in a hotel, ate in restaurants, and attended the theater, luxuries they rarely indulged in at home. "I wanted to remind you that you married a man who can provide more than just a ranch house and home cooking," James said as they dressed for the theater. "You provide everything that matters," Catherine said, adjusting his collar, "but I am enjoying this too." That night, lying in the hotel bed, James pulled her close. "I know I do not say it often enough, but you have made my life extraordinary. Every single day with you has been a gift." "You show me every day," Catherine replied. "In the way you look at me, the way you support my work, the way you are with our children, I know I am loved, James. I have never doubted it." "Good. Because I am going to love you until my last breath, and probably beyond." The years continued to unfold with the usual mix of joy and challenge. They weathered drought years and abundant years, sickness and health, disappointments and triumphs. Their children grew into young adults who made them proud. David went east to college, studying journalism like his mother. Michael became a rancher, buying land near his uncle Robert. Emma married a horse trainer who had learned his craft from her father. James's hair went gray at the temples and Catherine's was shot through with silver. They moved a bit slower, tired a bit easier, but the core of what they were together never changed. They still talked for hours, still laughed at each other's jokes, still reached for each other in the night. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were 14 people now in their immediate family, with more likely to come. James stood to make a toast, raising his glass. 30 years ago, I married the bravest woman I have ever known. She came west alone with nothing but determination and hope, and she built a life that has blessed everyone it has touched. Catherine, you are my heart, my partner, and my greatest adventure. Here is to 30 more years. Here is to 30 more years, everyone echoed. Catherine stood and kissed her husband, not caring that their children groaned good-naturedly. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, always. As the party continued around them, Catherine took a moment to step out onto the porch, looking across the land they had built their life on. The prairie stretched endlessly, golden in the late afternoon sun. She thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach so many years ago, desperate and uncertain. She thought about the cowboy who had offered respect and shelter, asking nothing in return. She thought about all the moments in between that had led to this, a life rich with love, family, purpose, and deep contentment. James came out to join her, slipping his arm around her waist. What are you thinking about? Everything, how far we have come, how much we have built together. No regrets, not a single one. They stood together in the golden light, watching the sun set over the land they loved, surrounded by the family they had created, secure in the knowledge that they had found what so few people ever did. A love that was both passionate and enduring, a partnership that was both equal and devoted, a home that was built not just of wood and nails but of trust and respect and unwavering commitment. The years that followed were gentler, marked by the slowing pace of age. James finally retired from active horse training, though he still consulted and taught. Catherine wrote less frequently but more thoughtfully, her pieces now focused on reflecting on a life well lived and the changes she had witnessed in the West. They spent their days tending a large garden, visiting with grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. Do you remember the day we met? Catherine asked one afternoon as they sat in rocking chairs on the porch, a scene that had become their favorite pastime. I remember everything about that day. You looked so lost and so determined at the same time. I knew if I did not help you, I would regret it for the rest of my life. You changed everything for me. You gave me not just a room but a future. You gave me a reason to come home every day. Before you, this was just a house. You made it a home. Their children worried about them as they aged, wanting them to move closer to town or to move in with one of them. But James and Catherine refused. This was their land, their home, the place where they had built their life together. They would stay as long as they were able. And they did, supporting each other through the inevitable challenges of aging, caring for each other with the same tenderness they had shown from the beginning. When James fell ill one winter with pneumonia, Catherine nursed him through it with fierce determination. When Catherine's arthritis made it hard to do simple tasks, James patiently helped without ever making her feel diminished. We are quite a pair, Catherine said one evening as James helped her to bed, both of them moving slowly. The best pair, James agreed. I would not trade a single day, not even the hard ones. Neither would I. On a spring evening in their 45th year of marriage, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had performed thousands of times. The prairie was coming alive with new growth, the air was soft and sweet, and their great-grandchildren were playing in the yard under the watchful eyes of their parents. This is everything, James said quietly. This moment right here, this is what life is supposed to be. I am so grateful I stepped off that stagecoach, Catherine said. So grateful you were standing there to offer me hope. I am grateful you were brave enough to take it." They held hands, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together. In that moment, they needed no words. Everything that mattered was understood between them, woven into 45 years of shared experiences, mutual respect, enduring love, and the simple but profound choice they had made all those years ago to trust in each other and build something lasting. James passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years later at the age of 75, with Catherine beside him holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you. I have always loved you." "I love you too," Catherine whispered. "Thank you for giving me the most beautiful life." She grieved deeply but without regret, knowing they had been blessed with far more time than many couples received. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by the love of her large family, still writing occasionally, still telling stories about the cowboy who had offered a lonely young woman respect and shelter and, ultimately, a lifetime of love. On a summer evening, sitting on the porch of the home she and James had built together, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Catherine closed her eyes and smiled. She could almost feel James beside her, his hand in hers, his quiet presence steady and sure. "I am coming home," she whispered, and in the golden light of the setting sun, Catherine Moore Thornton breathed her last, ready to rejoin the man who had been her partner, her love, and her greatest adventure. Her family buried her beside James on a hill, overlooking the prairie, 2 simple stones marking the resting place of 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a love story for the ages. The inscription on their joined headstone reads simply, "Catherine and James Thornton, they chose each other and everything else followed." And on that Kansas prairie, where a frightened young woman had once stepped off a stagecoach with nowhere to sleep, and a determined cowboy had offered respect and shelter, their story became legend. It was told and retold through the generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with grand gestures but with simple acts of kindness, respect, and the courage to trust in something new. Their descendants prospered on the land they had claimed, carrying forward the values of hard work, mutual respect, and enduring love that Catherine and James had exemplified. The house they built was preserved by the family, maintained as a testament to what 2 people could create when they chose partnership over convention, respect over exploitation, and love over fear. Visitors came from miles around to hear the story of the educated woman from Boston and the horse-breaking cowboy, who had offered her a room and, in doing so, had offered her everything. In the end, Catherine had arrived in Abilene with 5 job offers and no place to sleep, and she had found not just shelter but a home, not just employment but purpose, not just security but love. And James, who had spent years building a solitary life, had opened his door to a stranger and found the missing piece that made his world complete. Their love story was not one of dramatic rescues or impossible obstacles overcome. It was quieter than that, deeper than that. It was built on daily choices to honor and support each other, to work together toward common goals, to maintain respect even in disagreement, and to nurture affection even in the mundane moments of everyday life. It was a love story of the Wild West, grounded in the harsh realities of frontier life, but elevated by the determination of 2 people to create something better, something lasting, something worthy of remembrance. And it all began on a dusty street in Abilene, Kansas, in the spring of 1878, when a woman with nowhere to go met a man with room to spare. And they both had the wisdom to recognize that sometimes destiny arrives not with fanfare but with a simple offer of help, respect, and the promise of tomorrow. Their story lived on long after them, passed down through generations as a reminder that true love is built not in moments but in years, not in grand gestures but in daily choices, not in perfection but in acceptance and growth. Catherine and James Thornton had created something rare and precious, a partnership of equals, a love that endured, and a legacy that inspired everyone who heard their tale. In the end, that was the greatest gift they gave to each other and to all who came after them. Proof that even in the hardest circumstances, even in the wildest places, even when the odds seemed impossible, love could take root and flourish. All it required was courage, respect, trust, and the willingness to take a chance on each other. Catherine had stepped off that stagecoach expecting only to survive, to eke out an independent existence on the frontier. Instead, she had found everything she never knew she needed. And James, who had been content with his solitary life, discovered that opening his heart and home to someone else had not diminished him, but completed him. Together, they had written a story that their descendants still told with pride, a story of the Wild West that was about building rather than destroying, about love rather than violence, about the quiet heroism of choosing each other every single day for 45 years. The prairie wind still whispered through the grass on the hill where they rested, carrying their story across the land they had loved. And somewhere in that wind, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of their voices. James offering shelter and respect, Catherine accepting with gratitude and hope, and both of them pledging to honor what they built together for all the days of their lives. It was a promise they kept, through every joy and every challenge until the very end. And that, in the end, was the truest measure of their love story. Not in how it began, remarkable as that was, but in how they sustained it, nurtured it, and allowed it to grow into something that transcended their individual lives and became a legacy of love that would endure for generations. The 5 job offers had brought Catherine to Abilene. The lack of lodging had created a problem that seemed insurmountable. But James Thornton's offer of a spare room and respect had given her something far more valuable than employment or shelter. It had given her a future, a family, and a love that defined the rest of her life. And for James, the lonely cowboy who had built a house too big for one person, opening his door to a stranger had been the best decision he ever made. Catherine had filled not just his spare room but his life, his heart, and his days with meaning and joy that he had never imagined possible. Together, they had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest acts of human decency, and that respect, once offered and reciprocated, could be the foundation for everything else that mattered. Their story ended not with sadness but with fulfillment, not with loss but with legacy. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a family that carried their values forward into new generations. And in the town of Abilene, Kansas, where a young woman had once stood alone and afraid with 5 job offers but no place to sleep, the memory of Catherine and James Thornton stood as a testament to the transformative power of kindness, respect, and love. The end.